Good morning. Welcome to Wednesday in Holy Week. Stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, and I thought I'd read to you first with today's scripture. Today's written in John 13, verses 21 to 32. When Jesus had said these things, he was troubled in spirit and testified and said, "Most assuredly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." And the disciples looked at one another, perplexed about whom he spoke. Now there was leaning on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. Simon Peter therefore motioned to him to ask who it was of whom he spoke. And leaning back on Jesus' breast, he said to him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is he to whom I shall give a piece of bread when I have dipped it." And having dipped the bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. Now after the piece of bread, Satan entered him. Then Jesus said to him, "What you do, do quickly." But no one at the table knew for what reason he said this to him, for some thought because Judas had the money box that Jesus had said to him, "Buy those things that we need for the feast," or that he should give something to the poor. Having received the piece of bread, he then went out immediately, and it was night. So when he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and glorify him immediately." Amen. There's a lot of immediacy in the scripture today. Just thinking about Holy Week, how it's not just Good Friday and Easter Sunday that we reach this crescendo in the story, but all the way through Holy Week, the scriptures, we have this immediacy, we have this this crescendo leading to this act. And I just think, with Judas Iscariot, his betrayal, his fulfillment. Good Friday is fulfillment on the cross. Easter Sunday is fulfillment of God's victory over death and evil. And I just think, all the way through Lent and Holy Week, we have this build up to fulfillment. It's very much like the peak that we talk about with the COVID crisis. And just think, there's so much of scripture that speaks into what is happening in our lives, especially now more than ever. And this too, God will have victory over. I just think, as we go through Holy Week in that walk to the cross, we think of the story yet again that we tell every year. We retell that story, that Easter story, that Holy Week journey to the cross and victory over death. And we must never not tell this story either. We must, just as we learn from how scripture speaks into our lives and how the Easter story speaks into our spirituality and our being, we must never forget this story. I was on Facebook the other day and I've noticed that somebody's put a beautiful piece together of all the different things that have been happening, so that in a year's time that can generate in our mini feeds and we can be reminded of what happened a year ago. And I think we should never forget. We should never forget this part of history that's happening right now. We should never forget the grief. We should never forget the pain. We should never forget the loss. And we should never forget the volunteering and the incredible NHS. We should never forget those who have kept our societies going with the deliveries and shop assistants and care workers. We should never forget the bad, and we should never forget the good. We should never take for granted the way that the earth is healing right now. And I just think in this time in Holy Week, as we go through darkness, and on Easter we enter into light, we too, with this COVID crisis, are going through periods of darkness in people's lives, and we will find light. There is light. May we never forget. I came across a beautiful poem, so I'm going to finish today's reflection with a poem. When darkness seems to hide his face, I rest on his unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Saviour's love. Through the storm, he is Lord, Lord of all. As ever, stay safe. God bless you.